Good morning. Today on Spotlight, I'll sit down with Jim Saber. He is the president and CEO of Next Energy. He'll talk about technology today and into the future. And later, I'll sit down with Sean H. Wilson of the Ford Motor Company Fund. He'll talk about his brand new Men of Courage podcast. And we'll also tell you about an election special coming your way next week. It's Sunday, September the 30th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. For that person out there who doesn't know what Next Energy is and doesn't realize that you've been around since 2002, what is it? How would you
Next Energy,
succinctly tell them?
Sure, we're a business and technology accelerator. We work with innovators to create cleaner, smarter, and more accessible solutions for cities and communities. So think about the next generation of smart homes, smart buildings, how we, smart transportation, how we move people more effectively from point A to point B, and working with industry and other partners to help us get there faster.
Is Detroit a good place to be headquartered for something like that?
Detroit's a wonderful place to be headquartered for these types of applications. Well, one, from the mobility side, we have the vast majority of the talent here in the United States that are working on the next generation solutions.
The engineering talent.
Engineering, marketing, we're even a great place to test and deploy. We have all four seasons. Our geography, the population density looks like the vast majority of the cities around the world. So if we can test and validate and prove these things out here and deploy them here, we can export them anywhere.
All right. We're hearing an awful lot these days about mobility. And from Washington to California to Detroit, it's sort of like a horse race.
Sure. So mobility, our work as a nonprofit corporation, as an accelerator, is really to help others get there faster. Mm-hmm. So we're not the company that's going to commercialize the technology or sell it or provide it as a service. We work with everyone else who wants to do that and wants to move it forward. So we work with a Ford Motor Company. We're working with General Motors and DTE on fast charging electric vehicles so that when you go and plug in your electric car, it's close to a similar experience of going to a gas station. So we work with others to help them get there faster. To
get where they're going. Do you are you convinced, as I think a lot of others are, that that is indeed the way of the future, and how we get people from point A to point B will not be the traditional ways in which we've done it?
Yeah, I would say when we think about how we take a car today, right? Your personal car. It's parked 20 hours plus a day.
Okay, wow.
So it's not a very efficient resource. And so what else can we do with that resource? What else can we do with it that's going to create more value? Shared cars, shared service. So you see like Zipcar, you see General Motors here in Detroit with Maven. Different companies, different technologies that are in business models that are helping to move people more effectively at lower costs. So that's something that is going to continue to grow. We have a continued movement of people that want to move into cities and urban areas, which then, if everyone owns their own vehicle, creates more congestion. And millennials and others are used to sharing their things, their technology, and are more apt to that type of application. So that lends us to different mobility services and different options. But then when we think of the resources, we think of electric mobility and electric transportation because we can integrate that into the rest of our homes, our buildings, our environment much easier.
All right, you've been involved in a number of partnerships with a number of different companies. I want to talk about some of them, and you can drill down on them for me. Denso.
So Denso is a corporate sponsor of Next Energy. We work with their venture capital arm, and we help to identify new startup companies and new technologies that they can either invest in or partner in. And then we have also worked with their innovation and product development teams to learn about new solutions and new technologies. One of the bigger applications that we worked with Denso on was a program we called M-Drive. And it was a car sharing pilot that we worked with Denso and the University of Michigan Dearborn on, where we created a car sharing application for 30 students in one of their college dorms for the course of a year. So we train the students, we put the infrastructure in so they could charge the cars, help them with the apps that they could communicate with each other, and then work with Denso to understand how did the students use the cars, what would be new solutions that they might want to put into their next generation products that would be more beneficial for car sharing and be more beneficial for electric vehicles.
All right, lighting technology.
So think of lighting technology, think of smart buildings, think of the lights go on as you walk into a room, or the lights dim or turn off when you leave the room. Think of that if it's really sunny one day or outside and you're working next to a window, the lights aren't on at kind of full blast. They can dim themselves based on all these different sensors, all these different inputs that make the building more efficient and make the user experience better for the occupants in the building.
We'll come back and we'll pick up on this conversation with Jim Saber. Stay with us. And welcome back to Spotlight. CHAR-N, I said it correctly, right?
Yes.
Okay, CHAR-N, what is that?
So the CHAR-N Alliance is an alliance of 139 companies that are focused on accelerating standards for charging of electric vehicles. So think of the standard for how the vehicle plugs in. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that when you roll up to a charging station, you're plugging in your car is the same thing like charging a cell phone. It's that simple. And so we don't want to have different connections and different things for different forms of charging. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect is once the vehicle once you plug in, all the information that needs to flow from the car to the charging station and maybe to the utility grid or the building flows the same way, so that you can create scale for all these applications.
How big is Next Energy and how fast are you growing?
Well, we're kind of tiny. We're about 10 people. We're actually in a hiring mode right now. So we'll probably get to 13 people before spring.
Smart Cone?
Smart Cone. Smart Cone is it's a really kind of cool technology and a cool company. They were the winners of our Smart Cities Challenge that we ran in 2017. That was sponsored by Wells Fargo, DT Energy, and Denso. And it was a global competition to bring in innovators that were developing new technologies for mobility and smart homes and smart buildings. They're out of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And they have a technology that if you installed it in an intersection, it would provide notice to vehicles and cars, or the drivers, that a pedestrian or a cyclist is in the bike lane that's crossing their path that they may not see. So if you drive around Detroit and you see all the bike lanes now that we have on the roads.
Yep, there are a ton of them, especially if you're driving downtown.
Yeah, there's the sidewalk, the bike lane, and then on-street parking. And so sometimes it's hard to see when pedestrians or cyclists are going to be crossing your path. Their technology would understand if it's a person on a bike or a pedestrian, and they would send an alert to the cars that would be crossing the intersection that there's going to be someone that they're going to have to pay attention to, and ultimately it provides information that would be able to make cycling and walking in cities more safe.
And that technology is going to become pretty much status quo in our vehicles. I mean, I already see some of it now. If a car is coming up on you, I know on some makes and vehicles, you'll get a little flashing light in your side view mirror.
Yeah, so that's that's one aspect of it. This is that you would be able to detect far in advance that there's a pedestrian or there's a cyclist or whatever. And right now it would be a visual alert to the driver, at a height that the driver would see, and so that they would understand that there's something coming their way. In the future, through that technology, it might actually be from the bike itself, or the person's cell phone or smartwatch or whatever it is that would communicate directly to the car. If that car was automated, let's fast forward 15 years and no one's driving our cars and they're driving themselves, that would just be seamless.
Wow, things are changing. What's the future of Next Energy?
The future of Next Energy is creating stronger partnerships with the companies that we're working with today, being a stronger part of their innovation ecosystem, and a valued resource to them, and showing how these technologies can be piloted and be deployed at scale. So we're, the smart cone demonstration we talked about, them winning that competition, now they're partnering with Wayne State University and are going to demonstrate that technology on Wayne State's campus. And so that will go live this fall. We're working with Planet M, which is the mobility arm of the MEDC, and helping them to run pilots that are going to attract new innovators that are already within Michigan or to Michigan to demonstrate and prove out their technology here and create more options for us moving forward and more partnerships.
And for the person out there that's saying, what is MEDC, Michigan Economic Development
Yes.
Corporation? What are you developing, or are you developing something to protect those that are on these scooters and those who may be encountering the scooters that are all over downtown and midtown? And I raised that because I heard a story the other day. There's some cities that are starting to outlaw them. I think Hollywood and I think Kansas City, or a part of Kansas City. And while I know that it's a mobility factor and it's getting young people or whoever's on them from point A to point B and quickly throughout a city, so there's a positive side to it. There's also the safety and danger side, and I've seen them go down the street and they go pretty darn fast, and and they're whipping through.
So think of like that smart cone demonstration. That would work for somebody on a scooter as well. It doesn't have to be a bike. It doesn't, you know, the technology just through thermal imaging just recognizes that there's something, you know, of a certain size moving in their direction. So having that technology would make it safer for people on bicycles and scooters. You know, scooters, it's a good form of transportation, and electric scooters are good for. They can move a little faster. They can move at at more constant speeds. They're good for the environment because they don't produce emissions. And yeah, and some cities are struggling to understand how they may work with them. I think, you know, Detroit's pretty unique in the leadership in the city that's not pulling scooters off the road. They're actually working with the manufacturers and the operators to understand, you know, how do we do this better? What are the things that we need to do as a region to be able to embrace this technology even more?
Yeah, what I don't see is a lot of people on scooters wearing helmets, which, and I don't know enough about the scooters as to whether or not that's something that the legislature or city councils are going to have to look into to protect that person on that scooter.
That's going to be something that we're going to have to, you know, people are going to have to look at and understand, you know, what would be the requirements. I mean, a lot of the things that cities are seeing right now is, it's not that, you know, they're opposed to the scooter. They're opposed to somebody leaving, you know, the scooter on the sidewalk where it might not, you know, be a best place to leave it, or having lots of them parked in one spot that creates, you know, other issues. So a lot of the things is, you know, just what are the unintended consequences when we look at a new technology, and how do we create the right policies and regulations that allow it to be cleaner and, you know, kind of a more smooth transition so that we can, you know, look at these new options.
Final question, what's your competition and what keeps you up at night?
Competition, you know, our competition is more global. The world's getting smaller. You know, when we started in 2002, we were pretty much a state of Michigan organization. We were trying to develop all these things in the state of Michigan and have a significant economic development impact for the state. You know, fast forward 16 years through the internet and, you know, the world getting smaller. Now we're working with companies all over the world, and how they and where they develop technology and where they deploy it. It's just getting much smaller. So when I think of our competition, it's how do we partner with others? You know, we're fortunate that we're part of a larger national network. We're part of two networks. One is called Incubate Energy, and one is called the IN2 network. And these are Next Energy-like organizations from around the country and around North America that are helping others commercialize technology. So when we find one of the companies that we're working with here locally, a great opportunity for them, let's say it's in Boston for a new project or a new investor, we have a partner in Boston that we can share information with, or vice versa. So that's one way of kind of minimizing that competition and focusing on the true mission, which is to move technology forward.
All right.
What keeps me awake at night? We're a nonprofit. It's how do we maintain the level of resources and the level of expertise that we need to achieve our mission. I mentioned we're small. We're small with a lot of expertise and with a lot of people that have great practical knowledge on how do you develop new programs, how do you run things, how do you grow businesses, and maintaining that expertise.
Jim Saber, best of luck. This sounds fascinating. I'm glad you're in Detroit, and hopefully as you get bigger, you'll remain in Detroit.
We're not going anywhere. We've been here for 16 years, and we're going to be here for a long time.
All right. We're glad to have you, and good luck with all that you're doing, and we'll get you back and bring us up to date on all the things that you're doing.
Would love to.
All right. Thank you so much. And we'll be back in just a second, and we'll sit down with Sean H. Wilson of the Ford Motor Company Fund. Stay with us. Welcome back to Spotlight. Joining me now is Sean H. Wilson, not to be confused with the other Sean Wilson in town, who's all about all the time. You guys ever bump into each other?
We bump into each other all the time.
Okay.
And we keep saying we're going to do an event together. We got to make that happen.
Maybe
you can host it.
All right. This is Sean H. Wilson of the Ford Motor Company Fund and the host of a new podcast for the Men Encourage program that you've been working on for quite a few years now. What?
3 years.
3 years.
So the program started here in Detroit,
right?
Really in partnership with Big Sean, Shaka Senghor, and Dave Bing. And
part of the mentorship program, I know that Dave Bing is heavily into mentoring young men now, and this is from men,
so
18 years and older?
Yeah, this is really for adults, for African-American men. And the goal was really to create an initiative that advanced the narrative and economic mobility for black men in America. We want to make sure that people understand who African-American men are, the complexities, but also the many, many contributions that they bring to our country. And so we started by doing a storytelling forum with a diverse intergenerational group of African-American men focusing on storytelling, visioning, and then ultimately asset mapping. And we started here in Detroit, took it around the country to Atlanta, Baltimore, Chicago, LA. And one of the most compelling components of it was that storytelling piece. And so what
that kind of led into the podcast, which you just launched.
Right, because everyone would come out of these forums just feeling inspired, feeling pumped up, really, really wanting to.
So when people tune into
positive.
the podcast, what are they hearing?
So they're going to hear a group of intergenerational men talking about everything from family to business, entrepreneurship, mental health. And I think you're going to get a really interesting view of who African-American men are and kind of change your opinion of who they are.
What's probably a little too early to quite tell the reaction yet, but how are you planning on sort of gauging that reaction?
So we launched last Friday, and we did a launch party. So we've been really getting some interaction. One of the or some feedback. One of the biggest points of feedback has been coming from women. Who have been saying that they've really enjoyed listening to these men tell the story of their life. But the second purpose of this podcast is to create a blueprint for black men to follow. So what we know is that African-American men actually have the blueprint for success. The issue is I have a piece of it, you have a piece of it, Big Sean has a piece of it, Dave Bing has a piece of it. So this is a podcast
it wasn't
where
necessarily
all that
always
comes
coming together, but this ties it
as
together.
one. Absolutely.
Yeah. If people are interested in getting the podcast, will they just download it?
Yep, they can go to menofcourage.com. They can go to iTunes, Google Play, pretty much anywhere that you normally listen to your podcast, they can go to.
Podcasts have become very, very popular. But how do you get in and make a niche in that market, which I assume is getting pretty crowded now?
Yeah. Well, the good thing is you really don't have a ton of podcasts geared towards African-American men. Okay. And so we're unique in that aspect. And then I think the intergenerational piece of our podcast is important. And it's really interesting. So for instance, talking with Big Sean and Ambassador Young, They both have very similar.
Andrew Young,
out of Atlanta, civil rights icon, and they have very similar approaches when it comes to dealing with racism. Both of them believe that you have to do it from a point of love, right? And so it's this intergenerational piece that is really interesting to kind of delve into.
How do you select the young men that are in the program, and then how are you selecting those that you're going to be interviewing and featuring in the podcast?
So very similar approach. We want to curate a diverse group of black men. So, you know, we don't want it to be all millennials. We don't want it to be all celebrities. We don't want it to be all politicians. We want to select and curate
real cross mix.
Real cross mix, because I think that's where you find some interesting dialogue, but also you see the commonalities and the similarities of what black men deal with. You know, one of the things that really has struck me is the amount of pressure that black men feel, and the different ways that they deal with that.
Self-induced pressure, or is it outside pressure, the world putting pressure?
So I think it's a combination, right? Okay. So for instance, one of my favorite stats is that Center for Disease Control did a 6-year study to gauge the level of engagement between men and their children, all men and their children, and found that black men were actually the most engaged of any race. Now that goes counter narrative to what you
stereotype that's out there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so when you think about that, I think African American men put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be the best fathers because we understand the stigma that's out there, even though it's a false narrative. And so one of the things that this podcast does is to tell that narrative of black men are great fathers. We are innovative. We are barrier breakers. We are all these amazing things. And I think that can really help to counter the negative narrative that's out there about us.
All right. Another addition to the Men of Courage, Sean H. Wilson.
Now let me say this. Yeah. I try to channel my best Chuck Stokes in producing this and hosting it. I probably failed miserably, but I have a whole new respect.
You probably did extremely well. If that was your level of comparison, you don't have anything to worry about.
I have a whole new respect for what you do, I'll tell you that.
I'm sure it's going to go well. Best of luck, and I'm glad that you're doing this. It's real important to our society as a whole. All right. And we'll be back in just a second with a special message about an election special that we're going to be featuring here at Channel 7. We hope you stay with us. And finally today, I invite you to join me early next week for a Bounce Detroit Spotlight on the News special inside Michigan's African American vote. It's 1 hour. It is, I think, a fascinating look from a wide range of experts talking about what African Americans have done in the past and what they may very well do on November 6th, Election Day, and into the future. Once again, it's a 1 hour special on Bounce TV and on Channel 20. Spotlight on the News special inside Michigan's African American vote. Please join us. I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more newsmakers in the spotlight. We hope you have a great week.